Okay, this is going to be the last part of lesson 2, and we're going to continue our talk on project settings. We've already looked at the Mercury playback engine component of it, so let's go back up to File and go to Project Settings and General. That's going to open the Project Settings panel, and this first part we looked at in the last video. Now we're going to look at our video display format options, and when it says time code, it's referring to the numbers that we see here. Right now it's currently set to time code, so it's doing hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. So each part of these denotes a different part of that time measurement. There is a drop down here. The next two that you see are feet plus frames. One's 16 millimeters and the other one's 35 millimeters. So this is looking at the number of feet plus the number of frames since the last foot. 16 millimeter and 35 millimeter are both film types that people still use to make movies. It's not as prominent nowadays because it's not as cost effective, but some of the bigger producers still use it. And you may need to have this information, so if you have to give information to a lab and they can cut the original negatives, which is that film, you may need this type of measurement. And then the last one you see is frames. So instead of doing, hours, minutes, seconds, frames, this one's going to count just solely in frames. And if you were working on some sort of still animation or, using extra components to do animation type stuff, this would probably be how you'd want to display your format. But for right now, time code is just great. We're going to leave that alone, but at least you know what those are. The other thing here is audio samples, and you can see that the default one is plain audio samples, and this means it is doing hours, minutes, seconds, and frames, just like our time code. And then the second one, and when those frames are referred to, they also could be called samples. Milliseconds is actually going to be hours, minutes, seconds, and thousandths of a seconds instead of samples. So it's going to take you a lot closer to the finite details of sound mixing. And if that's how you want to view stuff, you could choose to see it that way. Audio samples is just fine. One of the next things that the book is talking about is I'm going to actually pop out of this window and we're going to look at one way that we can view these audio frames. So hit cancel, and this here bar at the bottom on your timeline allows you to zoom in and out. So right now I'm zooming out so I can see more. All my clips get smaller. If I drag it back to the left, the clips are getting bigger and you can see the timeline a little bit better. So we're seeing that time code, and you can go all the way down to these are individual frames as it's moving along. If you come up here in this area and right click, you can go to show audio time units and then watch closely where you see the numbers, they will change. So now we are looking at those milliseconds or thousandths of a second, thousandths of a second. So you are now seeing that. So it's even, I'm clicking over frame by frame, but it's actually doing the smaller numbers now. So that's good for audio adjustments, and then you can come right click and turn that off. So now we're back to frames. So there's another way to switch in and out of that for audio purposes if you want it. Okay, so let's go back up to File, Project Settings, and we'll click General. And next it talks about capture format. So right here is DV or HDV. That means high definition digital video. DV is digital video. And that would be as if you're bringing something in from a videotape or you have a videotape deck. And this is all external stuff that has to be connected up to your computer to be able to use this capture component. And that will also tie in with the ingest settings, which we will see here in just a moment. All right, so next up, the book is talking about scratch disk. That's this tab right here. And you can see that the scratch disk captures a variety of items, such as video from tape, special effects, backup copies of our project, downloaded content from Adobe stock, imported animation, graphics, templates, or even when we do a recorded voiceover, we can do those in Premiere as well. You have control over where they are saved. A lot of the times I prefer everything to be same as project, because that way I don't have one general area where everything's getting dumped into, especially when I work on a lot of projects. I like to have everything project-based, and that is one of the ways to view it. Project-based setup is the terminology for that, and that's basically everything is in the same folder or same project as you see here. You could also tell it documents, or you could choose it a custom place as well. One of the things that you might do if you're working on a bigger project and you want to make sure everything goes to the same place, you could use a system-based setup, and that would be one central location where everything gets dumped and not necessarily where the little project file was being saved. It's usually good for high-speed network-based storage or when you're collaborating with other people. All right. The other one that we have brought some attention to is the project autosave option. So if you left all these other ones same as project, this one you may want to consider setting it to a new location. And your IT department or computer engineers would argue the fact that if you only had a file saved in one place, that it's not always as safe, or you can't guarantee that file. By having your autosaves go to a secondary drive or an external source, if something would happen to the one drive where you've saved everything else, you could still recover a version or an autosave version of that project you're working on. So that's something to think about when you're doing work on to where you want to locate stuff. Right now you can see all this stuff is heading right back to that lessons folder. And also the drive that it's being stored on right here, you can see how much space is left. Since these are all same as project, you see this number matches all the way down. So that's how you read some of this content. And I know this is a lot to look about as far as interface and understanding setup. But some of this stuff gets really important, especially when you're getting new clients or when you're the one that's supposed to have the most knowledge as far as using the software and being able to set everything up right. So getting some of this stuff out at the beginning and at least hearing about it, I think will help as you move along. You'll be able to remember more of it as we go. Okay, so one other part of project settings is ingest, and you would have to click this little check mark to turn it on. And then you get options here such as copy, transcode, create proxies, copy and create proxies. And you're wondering, what does that all mean? So a copy is basically what it says, making a copy to a new storage location. And that's when you want to make sure all your media is in one folder. So that's one way to ingest stuff. Transcode is basically all the files are coming in with a new codec or format. So if you have a large workflow and you have to try to standardize like all your files, this might be a good way to look at ingesting. Creating proxies. This is used a lot of times when you have heavy effects or a lot of stuff going on, and it allows a smaller resolution file to be worked with inside of Premiere, which helps your processing speeds if your computer's not as strong. And then you can always mix back and forth from the original high-res image to the proxy. So it's kind of one of those things that could help speed you up depending on what your outcome or needs are. And then, of course, copy with create proxies is combining the copying and the original media files to a new location to create the proxies for them. So that kind of takes the first one and the third one and does both. And that puts it all in one folder for you. We don't need to ingest anything, so I can turn that off. And I think with that, we're now at the end of this chapter. So we have a pretty good understanding of some settings and why our timeline is green or red or yellow. We've looked at some of that. And hopefully that's giving you a little bit more about interface.